Silk once held greater value than gold, and a handful of spice could purchase a kingdom. The true architects of our world were not emperors or generals, but the merchants who walked forgotten paths. This is the story of the 25 overland trade routes that secretly built the ancient global economy. By the end, your understanding of how civilizations connected will be fundamentally reshaped. How did a single blue stone from Afghanistan end up in an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb? Why would a civilization risk crossing a sea of sand just for a whisper of fragrant resin? We will trace these hidden lines on the map, routes that carried more than goods. They carried the very DNA of culture and innovation across continents. What does it say about us that our deepest connections were forged not by conquest, but by commerce? That bolt of silk did not travel alone. It moved within a system, an ancient rhythm of commerce that functioned as the lifeblood of civilizations long before the concept of a global economy existed. This was a world where trade was not a simple transaction but a grand, perilous relay race across the face of the earth. Think of it this way: a merchant in Chang'an, the capital of Han Dynasty China, would never meet the wealthy patrician in Rome who would eventually wear his silk. Between them stretched a chain of intermediaries, a sequence of handshakes and negotiations that spanned continents. Goods moved from one trading post to the next, each stop adding value, changing hands, and absorbing stories from the culture it passed through. This was commerce built on trust networks and spoken agreements, where reputation was a merchant's most valuable currency. The risks were immense. A single caravan represented a fortune on the move, a tempting target for bandits in the mountain passes or shifting sands that could swallow an entire route whole. Political borders were fluid and often hostile, requiring payments to local rulers, what we might diplomatically call tolls or tariffs, simply for the right of passage. Yet the rewards were so extraordinary they justified these monumental hardships. A successful journey could elevate a merchant's family for generations, and the goods they carried, spices, incense, gemstones, textiles, were not mere luxuries. In the ancient world, these items held profound social and spiritual power. Frankincense resin from southern Arabia was not just a pleasant scent, it was the very breath of the gods, essential for temple rituals from Jerusalem to Babylon. Chinese silk was more than a beautiful fabric, it was a symbol of imperial authority and divine favor. This trade moved more than material wealth. As the historian noted, it was a conveyor belt for the intangible elements of civilization. A Buddhist monk might hitch a ride with a merchant caravan along the Silk Road, spreading religious ideas from India into Central Asia. A new design for a water wheel or a metallurgical technique for stronger steel could travel the same path as the spices that flavored a king's feast. Even challenges like illnesses previously unknown to a region could arrive with these traveling groups, reshaping populations in ways no one at the time could fully comprehend. This is the essential backdrop, the grand stage upon which our forgotten routes played their parts. They were the specific arteries of this vast circulatory system, each with its own unique terrain, its own dangers, and its own precious cargo that quietly reshaped the world. But what does it truly mean for a trade route to be forgotten? It is not simply a path that vanished from the map. Many of these corridors remained in local use for centuries. Their forgetting is a matter of legacy, a fading from our collective memory of the immense role they once played. While the Grand Silk Road captures the imagination with its tales of camels and spices, dozens of other arteries operated in its shadow, their stories fragmented across obscure texts, scattered artifacts, and the oral histories of nomadic peoples. These were the regional feeders, the alternative corridors that kept empires alive during times of conflict or connected cultures, the mainstream narratives overlooked. Their obscurity often has a simple material cause. Think of what they carried. While the Silk Road is famous for silk, jade, and spices, durable, valuable items that survive in tombs and treasury, records many forgotten routes dealt in perishable wealth. They moved vital commodities like grain, timber, salt, textiles, and livestock. These goods were consumed, they rotted, they were woven into clothing that wore out. They leave behind subtle clues, not gleaming treasures. Unearthing their history becomes a different kind of detective story. Archaeologists and historians must piece together puzzles from pollen analysis of ancient soils, tracing the spread of specific plants. They study linguistic drift, where words for certain goods reveal ancient contact between distant peoples. They map the diffusion of agricultural techniques, like a new way to terrace a hillside or irrigate a field, which moved along trade paths just as surely as any spice caravan. This is how we begin to redraw the map, not with bold lines for emperors and conquests, but with faint, enduring traces of everyday exchange that quietly built the world. A deep, honey-colored stone holds sunlight from a forest that vanished 40 million years ago. This was the treasure of the North, Baltic amber, and the path it carved across a continent is our first forgotten highway. Before the pyramids of Egypt were ancient, people were already gathering this fossilized resin from the shores of the Baltic Sea, drawn by its warm glow and its strange electrostatic property. When rubbed, it attracts dust and feathers, a phenomenon that must have seemed like captured magic. This material, lighter than stone and warmer to the touch than metal, became a desire that built a road. The Amber Road was not a paved Roman highway but a fluid, organic network. It followed the logic of the land, tracing the great rivers like the Vistula and the Oder, moving through dense European forests and across mountain passes. From the Baltic coast, raw amber would travel southward in a slow, multi-generational relay. Local tribes might trade it for salt or metals with their neighbors, who would carry it further, its value increasing with every mile it moved away from its source. This was a commerce of whispers and handshakes, connecting worlds that official history said had no contact. Think of that journey. A lump of amber, pried from a chilly northern beach, ends up centuries later as a finely carved scarab gracing the burial jewelry of an Egyptian pharaoh like Tutankhamun. How many hands held it? How many languages described its beauty? This trade created a silent dialogue between the Germanic and Celtic peoples of the north and the sophisticated civilizations of the Mediterranean. Long before Julius Caesar ever wrote about the fearsome tribes of Gaul, their amber was already gracing the necks of Mycenaean Greek nobles. The Greek myth of Phaethon, whose sisters were turned into poplar trees weeping tears of amber that fell into the Eridanos River, is now thought by some scholars to be a poetic memory of this very trade route, a story born from trying to explain the origin of this golden stone that arrived from the far north by river. The Amber Road's true power was as a conduit for more than pretty ornaments. With the amber came ideas, technological influences, and social customs. The North received bronze, glass, and perhaps new artistic styles in return. It was a slow, persistent knitting together of Europe, a cultural exchange that happened not through conquest, but through a shared appreciation for a piece of petrified sunlight. This golden highway reminds us that the ancient economy was built on profound and often beautiful wants, on the human urge to possess a piece of the distant and the magical. While amber carried the captured light of ancient forests, another route traded in the very breath of the divine. Deep in the deserts of southern Arabia, a tree bleeds. When its bark is carefully cut, it secretes a milky sap that hardens into translucent tears. This is frankincense, and alongside its sister resin myrrh, it formed the heartbeat of a civilization built not on gold but on scent. The Incense Route was a miracle of logistics in a landscape designed to forbid it. For over 1,000 years, starting around the 7th century before the Common Era, caravans of thousands of camels embarked on a 2-month journey from the fertile regions of modern-day Oman and Yemen, north through the relentless Arabian desert. Their cargo was these fragrant resins harvested from scraggly trees that grew in a narrow, impossible strip of land. In the ancient world, frankincense and myrrh were not mere luxuries. They were absolute necessities. Their smoke was believed to carry prayers directly to the heavens, making them indispensable for temple rituals from Jerusalem to Babylon. Myrrh was a key component in the sacred practices surrounding memorials and a valued ingredient in ancient medicines. The demand was so insatiable that these resins were literally worth their weight in silver. This economic reality built cities in the sky. To control and tax this flow of incense, phenomenal urban centers rose directly from the rock and sand. Petra, hidden behind a narrow sandstone gorge in modern Jordan, became a masterwork of hydraulic engineering and carved architecture, its wealth flowing from the caravans it sheltered. Further north, Palmyra emerged as a glittering oasis of columns and temples, a neutral trading hub that negotiated between the Roman and Parthian empires. These were not cities of farmers or soldiers, they were cities of merchants and toll collectors, monuments to the power of perfume. Their haunting ruins still astonish us precisely because they represent a civilization whose entire reason for being was facilitating this sacred exchange. So what could possibly cause such a mighty network to fade? The answer lies not in the desert, but in the sea. By the 1st century of the Common Era, a Greek sailor named Hippalus made a discovery that would unravel a 1,000-year-old system. He learned to harness the predictable monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. Suddenly, ships could sail directly from the incense-producing regions to Egyptian ports on the Red Sea, bypassing the entire treacherous, expensive overland journey. The desert caravans, once the lifeline of empires, could not compete with the efficiency and capacity of maritime trade. The Incense Route did not vanish overnight, but its lifeblood slowly drained away. The great caravan cities were gradually abandoned to the sands, leaving behind silent stone facades that whisper of a time when the most powerful thing in the world was a wisp of fragrant smoke. A civilization is only as strong as its most obscure import. For the glittering empires of the Bronze Age, from Mycenae to Mesopotamia, that critical ingredient was not gold or silk, but a dull, grayish metal called tin. The story of bronze is a story of scarcity, for while copper deposits were widespread, tin was one of the rarest commodities in the ancient world. To forge the tools that built cities, the weapons that defended them, and the art that glorified them, societies had to solve a supply chain puzzle of epic proportions. This was the domain of the forgotten tin route, a logistical network so vital it held entire eras together. Without it, the Bronze Age as we know it simply could not have existed. So where did this essential metal come from? The sources were astonishingly remote. One of the most significant lay at the very edge of the known world, in the rugged highlands of Cornwall, at the southwestern tip of Britain. Another major source was in the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, a world away from the Mediterranean centers of power. Getting tin from these distant points to the smelting furnaces of the Near East was an undertaking that spanned generations. It moved not along a single road, but through a clandestine, branching network of intermediaries. Tin from Cornwall might travel by boat along Atlantic coasts, then overland through Gaul, be traded to middlemen in the Alps, and finally make its way down into Italy or the Balkans. Afghan tin would join the broader Silk Road networks, heading west toward the great cities of the Levant. This was not casual trade, it was a strategic lifeline. The procurement of tin dictated foreign policy. Kingdoms went to war to secure access to mining regions or to control key passes along the transport corridors. Alliances were forged between powers who had copper and those who had tin. The search for new sources may have even driven some of the great migratory movements of the period. as communities pulled up stakes and journeyed into the unknown, following geological rumors of the precious gray ore. This puts the so-called Late Bronze Age collapse, a period around 1200 before the Common Era, when major civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fell in rapid succession, in a fascinating new light. Historians debate a combination of factors, from climate shifts to invasions, but we must ask, could a primary trigger have been something as simple as a broken link in this invisible supply chain? If piracy disrupted the seaborne tin trade from the west, or if conflict severed the overland routes from the east, the entire technological foundation of those societies would have crumbled. They would have had the knowledge to make bronze, but not the physical means. The tin route teaches us a profound lesson about interdependence. No ancient civilization was an island, even if it was on an island. Their brilliance was built on a fragile, globe-spanning web of necessity, connecting British miners and Afghan traders to Hittite smiths and Egyptian pharaohs through a shared, unspoken dependence on a humble metal. A desert can hide a river of gold. Far beneath the shifting dunes of the Sahara, a different kind of current flowed, one of unimaginable wealth and human tenacity. Long before the medieval caravans became legendary, Berber traders from North Africa were performing a feat that seemed to defy nature itself. Starting around the year 500 of the Common Era, they began to master the impossible crossing, forging the first enduring Trans-Saharan gold roads. Their goal was to connect two worlds that official maps said could not meet: the Mediterranean coast with the gold-rich kingdoms of West Africa, like Ghana and later Mali. This was not a single path, but a braided network of trails, each a calculated gamble against the largest hot desert on Earth. The logistics were a matter of life and death. Travel was only possible in the coolest months, and journeys could take up to 3 months one way. Caravans, sometimes comprising thousands of camels, moved in a precise, slow rhythm, guided by the stars and generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through oral tradition. They followed subtle cues in the landscape, the shape of a dune, the rare presence of specific plants, to find oases that were their only lifelines. What motivated such a perilous undertaking? The answer was a powerful economic equation. The desert itself produced one vital commodity: salt, mined from ancient deposits in places like Taghaza. In the lush, humid forests of West Africa, salt was scarce and precious, essential for preserving food and maintaining health. Meanwhile, the West African kingdoms sat upon alluvial gold fields of staggering abundance, gold that was panned from rivers but held little local value compared to salt. The Berber traders became the crucial link, transporting slabs of Saharan salt southward and returning north with gold, dust, ivory, and other goods. This exchange did not just move wealth, it created entirely new civilizations. At the strategic meeting points between desert and savanna, cities of legend rose from the sand. Timbuktu began as a seasonal camp for Tuareg nomads and bloomed into a metropolis of scholarship and commerce, its famous Sankore University attracting thinkers from across the Islamic world. The gold flowing north from these routes was so immense it reshaped continents. It financed the architectural splendors of North African dynasties, filled the coffers of Mediterranean powers, and by the 14th century was so plentiful it actually caused inflation in places like Egypt, devaluing their local currencies. The societal impact was profound and complex. This system also involved the movement of individuals under conditions of servitude, a painful chapter that underscores how these economic networks were intertwined with the full spectrum of human experience, from brilliant cultural achievement to profound hardship. The endurance required to sustain this trade for centuries is almost beyond comprehension. It stands as a testament not to the power of empires, but to the stubborn will of merchants and guides who looked at a sea of sand and saw a highway. A highway without a single paved stone stretched for thousands of miles. The vast, rolling grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, often remembered only for the empires that erupted from them, served a far more enduring purpose. This was the ultimate nomadic corridor, a fluid, living trade network that operated on horseback, from the edges of the Hungarian plain all the way to the borders of Manchuria. This sea of grass was not a barrier but a connector. Its inhabitants, the Scythian, Xiongnu, and later Mongol confederations, mastered a form of commerce that was as mobile as their lifestyle. They were the original long-haul couriers of the ancient world. Think of the logistics. A settled merchant in a Chinese border town or a Persian bazaar could not possibly undertake a journey of that scale, but a nomadic tribe, constantly on the move with its herds, could incorporate trade into its seasonal migrations. They acted as intermediaries, picking up luxury goods from the settled civilizations at the steppes' edges, Chinese silks and lacquerware from the east, Persian silverwork and carpets from the south, Greek gold and glass from the west, and transporting them deep into the interior, where they would be traded again at great gatherings or ceremonial events. This was commerce without borders, tariffs, or fixed markets. It was an exchange woven into the social fabric of the steppe, where a finely crafted Persian dagger might become a symbol of chieftain status, traded for horses or furs hundreds of miles from its origin. The speed was astonishing. On the open steppe, a mounted messenger or a trading party could cover distances that would take a settled caravan months, moving light and fast along known migratory routes and river valleys. This made the steppe corridor the original information superhighway, a zone of contact where more than goods changed hands. Artistic styles flowed with shocking fluidity. A gold plaque made by a Greek craftsman for a Scythian chieftain might blend Hellenistic realism with distinctively nomadic animal motifs, creating a new hybrid art. Military technology, like the stirrup or advanced composite bow designs, spread along these networks, reshaping warfare from Europe to Korea. Even spiritual ideas traveled, with shamanistic practices and later, strands of Buddhism and Islam, carried by travelers and absorbed into the tapestry of nomadic belief. This constant, low-level exchange is what truly enabled the later, more famous Silk Road. The formal, oasis-based routes we typically imagine were just the settled, southern fringe of a much broader system. The steppe was the dynamic, northern heart of it. When the Mongol Empire unified this entire corridor in the 13th century, they did not invent trans-Eurasian trade. They simply policed and supercharged a network that had been humming for over 2,000 years. Their famed Pax Mongolica was the ultimate expression of the steppe's purpose, a temporary peace that turned the nomadic highway into a secure thoroughfare, accelerating the flow of everything from porcelain to pathogens. So we must reconsider the narrative. These nomadic cultures were not merely destructive forces periodically crashing against civilization's walls. They were the essential circulatory system of the continent, the restless, mobile agents who kept the ideas and innovations of the ancient world in constant creative motion. A deep blue stone from a single mountain valley became the color of heaven itself. Lapis Lazuli, with its intense, celestial blue flecked with golden pyrite-like stars, was not just a gemstone to the ancient world. It was a piece of the divine realm made solid, and the path it forged from its remote source is one of humanity's oldest and most enduring trade routes. For over 6,000 years, from at least 4,000 years before the Common Era, this vivid blue was mined from just one place, the remote Kokcha Valley in the Badakhshan Mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. From this single, harsh source, it began an astonishing journey across continents, traveling over 1,500 miles to reach the glittering cities of Mesopotamia, the palaces of Egyptian pharaohs, and the sophisticated centers of the Indus Valley civilization. This was not occasional trade. This was a supply chain of staggering antiquity and resilience, a trail of blue that wove the earliest urban experiments into a shared network of desire. Think about the sheer scale of that journey in the 4th millennium before the Common Era. There were no empires to guarantee safe passage, no established maps, no common language of commerce. Yet raw blocks of lapis were painstakingly extracted, then carried by foot and pack animal across the brutal Hindu Kush mountains, through the deserts of Iran and into the fertile river valleys of the ancient Near East. The route was not direct. It moved through a series of intermediary cultures and trading hubs, like those in ancient Turkmenistan and Iran, where the stone would change hands, its value increasing with every league it traveled from its source. The demand was insatiable because the stone's meaning was profound. In Mesopotamia, it was carved into cylinder seals that validated royal decrees, the blue stone literally imprinting authority onto clay. In Egypt, it was ground into priceless powder to create the vibrant pigment for funeral masks and tomb paintings, ensuring the deceased would be surrounded by the color of the eternal sky and the protective powers of the gods. The most famous example, of course, is the golden funeral mask of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, its eyebrows and headdress inlaid with this luminous Afghan stone. Centuries earlier, the magnificent standard of Ur, a Sumerian mosaic from the city of Ur, used lapis to depict scenes of peace and war, its blue background speaking of cosmic order. This was more than decoration. It was a statement of power, piety, and connection to a wider world. The Lapis Lazuli route's true legacy is its proof of concept. It demonstrated that long before organized empires, the human hunger for rare beauty and symbolic power could create stable, millennia-spanning economic networks. It connected cultures that otherwise had no contact, from the miners of Afghanistan to the priests of the Nile, through a shared agreement that this particular shade of blue was worth any hardship to obtain. This route did not just carry a commodity, it carried an idea that the sacred could be sourced, traded, and worn, making the heavens a little closer for those who could afford its price. The celestial blue of lapis lazuli spoke of distant heavens, but another stone carried the very soul of the earth. For over 3,000 years, the mountains of Central Asia bled a cool, milky green, a stone so revered it became the physical embodiment of virtue itself. This was nephrite jade, and the forgotten roads that carried it wove a spiritual geography across the continent. While imperial Chinese workshops produced the most famous carvings, the stone itself did not originate within the heart of the empire. It was born in the harsh, remote mines of Cotton and Yarkand, oasis towns clinging to the edges of the fearsome Taklamakan Desert in the Tarim Basin. From these lonely outposts, a trade began that would define a civilization's aesthetic and spiritual core for millennia. Heavy, cumbersome blocks of raw jade were loaded onto specially reinforced carts and the backs of sturdy Bactrian camels. Their journey eastward into China was an act of profound endurance, a slow march across one of the most unforgiving deserts on the planet. The name Taklamakan itself is often translated from the Aigha language as the place of no return, a sea of shifting dunes where caravan guides navigated by sun and star from one tiny, life-giving well to the next. This was not casual commerce, it was a highly organized, state-sponsored undertaking, requiring knowledge passed down through generations of specialized traders who understood the desert's deadly rhythms. What awaited the stone at the end of its brutal journey justified every hardship. In the hands of Chinese artisans, the rough nephrite was transformed. It was carved into intricate discs symbolizing the sky, into Kong tubes representing the earth, into burial suits meant to grant immortality to emperors and nobles. Jade became far more than a decorative medium. In the philosophy of Confucius, it was the perfect metaphor for a moral gentleman, its qualities mirroring human virtues. Its coolness to the touch represented wisdom, its hardness symbolized courage, its smooth, unblemished surface stood for integrity. To hold jade was to hold an ideal. But the jade roads did not flow only east. In a fascinating westward arc, this same Central Asian stone traveled into Persia and the lands beyond, where it was also valued for its beauty and durability, often carved into ceremonial weapons and ornate vessels. This means that for centuries, these parallel flows of jade operated, often sharing the same daunting geography as the later, more famous Silk Road branches, yet maintaining their own unique identity and purpose. While silk was a commodity of luxury and diplomacy, jade was a commodity of cosmology and power. Its 3,000-year journey from mountain to workshop embedded it so deeply into the spiritual landscape of China that the stone and the civilization became inseparable. The route itself, a testament to human determination in the face of a hostile environment, quietly supplied the physical material for a culture's most profound ideas about heaven, earth, and the moral path between them. Deep in the mainland's rainforests, another kind of wealth grew. While the maritime spice route captured the world's imagination with its ocean voyages, the dense interior of Southeast Asia hummed with a parallel, overland network of astonishing complexity. These were the teak and spice trails, a web of river paths and mountain passes that moved the very essence of the forest itself. From the teak-rich highlands of Burma and the aromatic groves of Thailand, caravans and river barges carried a different set of treasures. Massive, durable teak logs, prized for shipbuilding and temple construction, were floated down rivers like the Irrawaddy and the Chao Phraya. Alongside them traveled forest resins like lacquer, used for waterproofing and exquisite art, and fragrant gums such as benzoin, a key ingredient in incense and perfumes. This was an economy built on scent and strength, flowing south to coastal ports for the international market, and north over rugged terrain into the demanding markets of China. Control of this flow was the foundation of kingdoms. The Mon and later the Khmer empires did not just happen to be in these locations. They strategically positioned themselves at the choke points of this inland exchange. Their power was directly funded by taxing the teak, the spices, and the resins that moved through their territories. The magnificent city of Angkor, with its vast temple complexes, was not just a religious center, it was the apex of a logistical network, a clearinghouse for the forest's bounty. Similarly, the plains of Pagan in Burma became studded with thousands of temples, their construction funded by this robust inland trade. But these trails carried more than material goods. They were the primary vectors for profound cultural transmission. As merchants and pilgrims traveled these forest paths, they brought with them the teachings of the Theravada Buddhism from Sri Lanka and India. This form of Buddhism took deep root in Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, precisely because it flowed along these established commercial highways. The cultural models came as a package. Temple architecture, Pali scripts, and monastic disciplines moved in the company of benzoin resin and teak planks. This creates a unique challenge for historians. How do you map a trade route that dealt primarily in perishables? Teak can survive, but a sack of fragrant spice or a pot of lacquer leaves no permanent trace. Our knowledge of these vibrant trails comes from oblique but beautiful sources. The bas-reliefs on the walls of Angkor Wat itself depict military processions and daily life that include detailed representations of trade goods. Chinese court records and the accounts of traveling monks describe the products coming from the southern kingdoms. These fragments hint at the scale of an inland economy that was every bit as dynamic as its maritime counterpart, quietly feeding the grandeur of empires with the breath of the forest. The scent of sandalwood and the gleam of tin moved along a shortcut through the jungle. While empires rose and fell, a slender land bridge on the Malay Peninsula held a secret, a terrestrial corridor that rerouted the map. During the first millennium of the Common Era, a sophisticated network of trails and river portages quietly connected two worlds. From the bustling, Indian-influenced Devaravati kingdoms in central Thailand, goods traveled south, not by sea, but overland, across the narrow isthmus of Kra to the thriving port of Kedah on the opposite coast. This was not a major highway by continental standards, but its strategic genius was in what it avoided. The sea voyage around the entire southern tip of the Malay Peninsula was a marathon of over 1,000 nautical miles, a journey plagued by unpredictable monsoons, treacherous reefs, and pirates who knew the ships were laden with wealth. The Devaravati-Kedah Tracks offered a radical alternative, a portage route where merchants could disembark on one coast, transport their cargoes overland for a matter of days, and re-embark on the other side, shaving weeks off their journey and sidestepping the Southern Ocean's worst dangers. Think of it as an ancient Panama Canal, carved not through rock but through collaborative enterprise. Local communities along the isthmus became essential partners in this system, providing guides, porters, and rivercraft for the transshipment, weaving themselves into the fabric of interregional trade. The goods that moved along this shortcut tell a story of profound exchange. From the west came Indian cotton textiles, intricately carved religious statues depicting Hindu and Buddhist deities, and the transformative technology of writing in the form of Sanskrit and Pali scripts. From the eastern side flowed local treasures, most notably the all-important tin from the Malay highlands, essential for the bronze casting that was spreading across Southeast Asia, along with the region's fragrant forest resins and prized hardwoods. This was more than a commercial exchange. It was a direct infusion of culture and statecraft. The Devaravati realms themselves were among the first in mainland Southeast Asia to coalesce into organized, urbanized states, and scholars note that this process was deeply catalyzed by the ideas arriving via these very tracks. The concept of kingship linked to divine authority, the architectural forms for temples, the legal and administrative frameworks, all entered the region along with the bolts of cloth and the sacred icons. The route acted as a focused conduit, channeling the civilizational package of India directly into the heart of emerging societies. Its legacy is one of quiet, disproportionate influence. By providing a safer, faster terrestrial shortcut, the Devaravati-Kedah Tracks ensured that the cultural and economic dialogue between the Bay of Bengal and the Gulf of Thailand remained constant and rich, allowing Southeast Asian cultures to engage with Indian ideas on their own terms, adapting and integrating them into something uniquely their own, long before the age of grand maritime empires. A single pelt of sable could purchase a lifetime of security. In the vast, silent forests and frozen tundra of Siberia, long before the first Russian fort was raised, a different kind of empire operated, one built on the softest, warmest wealth imaginable. Indigenous peoples from the Nenets of the Arctic coast to the Evenki of the Taiga had mastered their environment, and from it, they harvested a commodity that would link them to distant palaces and markets they would never see. This was the Siberian Fur Route, an ancient, resilient network that turned the Arctic into an early global marketplace. The logistics were a marvel of adaptation. Siberia's great rivers, the Ob, the Yenisei, the Lena, were its highways flowing north to south. In summer, they carried dugout canoes and rafts laden with furs. In winter, the same routes became smooth, frozen roads for sleds pulled by reindeer or dogs. Hunters and trappers from isolated family groups would bring their catches sable, ermine, Arctic fox, and later the precious sea otter pelts from the Pacific coast to seasonal gathering places. There, through a chain of intermediaries, the furs began an epic journey. They might be traded to a neighboring clan for metal tools or beads, then to a larger nomadic group, and eventually into the hands of professional merchants connected to the great southern civilizations. The destination of these furs reveals their staggering value. In China, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, sable and ermine trim on official robes denoted the highest ranks of the imperial court. The fur's quality and rarity were legally codified, a visible symbol of authority and refinement. Far to the west, in the markets of Novgorod and later in the trading posts of the Hanseatic League, Siberian furs were a luxury staple, sought after by European nobility to line their cloaks and adorn their hats. Persia, too, coveted these pelts for both fashion and ceremonial dress. This demand created a sustained economic engine that pulsed for centuries, entirely separate from the classical silk and spice trades to the south. The impact on Siberian societies was profound and complex. In return for furs, southern goods flowed northward, transforming daily life. Metal knives, needles, and kettles replaced tools of bone and stone. Woolen and cotton textiles introduced new forms of clothing. Perhaps most significantly, new spiritual ideas traveled along the same paths. Shamanistic traditions encountered and sometimes blended with elements of Buddhism, Islam, and later Orthodox Christianity, carried by traders and travelers. This was not a one-sided extraction, but a transformative exchange, however uneven the balance of power might later become. The sheer scale of this network, operating for centuries with no central authority, forces us to reconsider the map of ancient globalization. While historians of the classical world focused on the Mediterranean and the Silk Road, a parallel global commodity chain was thriving in the north, driven by a simple, universal human need for warmth and status. It remained largely invisible to the chroniclers of Rome or Chang'an, yet it shaped economies, motivated exploration, and wove the remote Arctic world into a web of desire that spanned continents. The quest for fur would eventually draw Russian expansion eastward in a relentless push, but that later chapter was merely the state taking control of a system that indigenous peoples had perfected long before. Their knowledge of the land, its animals, and its pathways built the first true bridge between the frozen forests and the wider world. The softest furs from the north met their match in a harder, more foundational need. For the world's first cities, rising from the mud between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a different kind of commodity defined their very existence. The story of Mesopotamia is often told through its ziggurats and cuneiform tablets, but its true foundation was forged in fire and metal. This was the Copper Road, a network of necessity that connected the fertile plains to distant, barren mountains, securing the metallic lifeblood of urban life itself. From the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, the burgeoning cities of Sumer and Akkad faced a critical problem. Their alluvial soil was rich for farming but held no metal ores. To build a civilization beyond mud brick, they needed copper, and lots of it. Copper was the plastic of the ancient world, the essential material for tools that tilled fields, weapons that defended city walls, and the fine art that honored the gods. This demand sent Mesopotamian merchants and diplomats on journeys to the ends of their known world. They looked south across the Persian Gulf to the rugged land they called Magan, modern-day Oman. Here, in the stark Hajar Mountains, lay some of the richest copper deposits in the ancient Near East. They looked north and west to the Taurus Mountains of Anatolia and the island of Cyprus, whose very name derives from the word for copper. Securing this supply was not a casual side business. It was a matter of state survival. The logistics were a masterpiece of early engineering and negotiation. Copper from Oman was likely smelted near the mines into ingots, shaped like ox hides for easy transport, then loaded onto ships to cross the Gulf. From ports in the south, the heavy metal would be transferred to river barges and hauled up the great waterways toward urban centers like and Babylon. Overland routes from Anatolia would have followed mountain passes, with donkey caravans carrying their precious metallic cargo into the heart of Mesopotamia. This trade established some of humanity's first documented international business practices. Cuneiform tablets record detailed commercial contracts, lists of tariffs, and diplomatic correspondence between Mesopotamian city-states and foreign rulers, all negotiating the terms of this vital exchange. Gifts of fine textiles and grain were sent to secure favorable deals, a form of ancient trade diplomacy. The need for copper did not just enable Mesopotamian civilization, it actively shaped its foreign policy and worldview. Kings launched military expeditions to protect mining regions or to keep trade routes open. The epic tales of heroes like Gilgamesh may carry echoes of these very real journeys into distant, resource-rich lands, quests for the materials that made civilization possible. When we look at a magnificent copper statue from ancient Sumer or a hoard of bronze weapons, we are not just looking at art or armament. We are looking at the endpoint of a vast, organized, and perilous supply chain, a network that reached across seas and mountains. The Copper Road was the practical, unsung engine behind the glittering achievements of the world's first cities. It reminds us that the birth of urban life was not just an intellectual or spiritual revolution. It was also a relentless, gritty struggle for resources, a puzzle solved through trade, diplomacy, and sheer determination, connecting the desert mines of Oman to the bustling streets of Babylon. A different kind of wealth gleamed in the mountains of Anatolia. While Mesopotamia sought copper for tools, the rugged highlands of modern-day Turkey held veins of a softer, brighter treasure, silver. From the early Bronze Age onward, the Anatolian silver trails became the financial arteries for emerging empires, moving a metal that would eventually become synonymous with money itself. Mining districts in the Taurus Mountains, places like Balkardag, were not just holes in the ground, they were the economic engines of their age. The silver extracted here, often alloyed with lead, did not stay local. It flowed south and east, feeding the mercantile ambitions of Assyrian traders and filling the treasuries of the mighty Hittite Empire. The Hittites, in fact, mastered this resource with remarkable sophistication. Their legal codes detailed regulations for mining, and their control over the trails leading from the mines to the major centers was absolute. This was not simply about luxury, it was about power. Silver provided the Hittite state with a stable, transportable form of wealth to pay soldiers, fund administrative centers, and secure alliances through lavish gifts to client kings. This flow began to standardize value in a way that barter could not. Before coins existed, silver was weighed in standardized shekels, a reliable measure of wealth that could be stored, transported, and recognized across borders. A merchant in Hattusa, the Hittite capital, and a trader in Assyrian Ashur could agree on a price measured in shekels of Anatolian silver, creating an early, informal monetary zone. The trails themselves carved the political landscape. Following these routes today, you can find the silent sentinels of this ancient economy, the ruins of Hittite fortresses perched on strategic hilltops and mountain passes. These were not just military outposts, they were customs houses and secure way stations, guarding the caravans that carried silver ingots and powdered ore. The very location of cities and the reach of empires were shaped by the need to secure these metallic lifelines. So when we later hold a Greek drachma or a Roman denarius, we are touching the endpoint of a system the Hittites perfected, a system where the control of a rocky path through the Taurus Mountains could dictate the balance of power across the entire Near East. The silver trails remind us that the first global economies were built not on paper, but on the tangible weight of metal, extracted from remote hills and guarded by stone forts, slowly transforming abstract wealth into something you could hold in your hand. From the arid highlands of Anatolia, we move to a land of monsoon rains and winding rivers. The wealth of the Indian Ocean did not simply lap at the shores of the subcontinent. It was drawn inland along a network of vital arteries. This was the Indian Ocean-Ganges corridor, the essential terrestrial link that turned coastal ports into gateways for an entire civilization. While ships from Rome and Arabia docked at bustling harbors like Barbarican on the Indus Delta or Baragaza on the west coast, their precious cargo had only begun its journey. From these ports, the real work of integration began. caravans of ox-drawn carts and pack animals would form, loaded with amphorae of Mediterranean wine, delicate Roman glassware, and gold coins. Their destination lay hundreds of miles to the east, the fertile, populous heartland of the Ganges Plain, and its magnificent imperial capital, Pataliputra. To get there, merchants faced a choice of ancient highways. One major route followed the Indus River valley northward before cutting east across the daunting expanse of the Thar Desert, a perilous trek between wells and oases. Another, perhaps more forgiving path, tracked eastward along the valley of the Narmada River, using its course as a natural guide through the rugged Vindhya Mountains. These were not casual trails, they were organized, monitored commercial corridors. The Mauryan Empire, which unified much of the subcontinent in the 3rd century before the Common Era, famously maintained these routes, planting shade trees, establishing rest houses, and ensuring security for travelers, a testament to their economic importance. This two-way flow transformed the subcontinent's interior. In exchange for the Mediterranean luxuries arriving from the coast, the Ganges Plain sent back its own unparalleled treasures. The finest cotton textiles in the ancient world, so light and delicate the Romans called them woven wind, made their way to the ports. Pearls from the southern coasts, pungent black pepper from the western hills, and exotic spices traveled the same roads in reverse. This constant exchange did more than fill market stalls. It created a profound cultural dialogue. Roman artistic motifs began to appear in the sculpture of Gandhara, in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan. Indian mathematical concepts, including the precursor to the numeral 0, may have begun their westward journey along these very routes, carried in the minds of traders and scholars. The corridor ensured that India was never an isolated peninsula, but a dynamic participant in a vast oceanic network. Its great inland cities, fueled by agricultural wealth, could access global markets without ever seeing the sea, while the coastal ports derived their purpose from the immense productive heartland behind them. This seamless connection between the maritime and the terrestrial is what truly powered the Indian Ocean world, making the overland corridor not a separate entity, but the vital inland extension of the sea itself. The soft gleam of ivory spoke of a different kind of power. Far from the Mediterranean's marble forums and the Silk Road's bustling caravanserais, a network of trails descended from the highlands of eastern Africa, carrying a wealth that made distant empires take notice. This was the domain of the Myrrh and Ivory trails, a system that turned the interior of a continent into a primary supplier for the classical world's most exclusive luxuries. From the dense forests and savannas, caravans organized by the Kingdom of Kush and later the formidable Aksumite Empire began a long trek toward the Red Sea. Their cargo was the very definition of exotic, enormous elephant tusks of unparalleled quality, dense ebony wood black as night, rare aromatic resins like myrrh, and other precious materials. These were not bulk commodities, they were prestige goods, each item carrying the mystique of a land the Romans called terra incognita, the unknown earth. The journey itself was a feat of organization. Porters and donkeys would move these heavy, valuable loads from the interior gathering points down through steep escarpments to the arid coastal plain. Their destination was the bustling port of Adulis, the Aksumite gateway to the world. At Adulis, African ivory met Roman merchants, South Arabian frankincense traders, and ships from distant India. Here, tusks were weighed, graded, and loaded onto vessels bound for Alexandria, Rome, and beyond. This trade was the economic engine of Aksum's rise. By controlling the routes from source to port, Aksumite kings did not just participate in trade, they mastered it. They minted their own gold coins, imprinted with their rulers' faces, a bold statement of sovereignty that circulated from the Mediterranean to Sri Lanka, advertising their central role in this network. The demand on the other end was insatiable. In Rome, ivory was the ultimate status symbol. It was carved into exquisite diptychs for consuls, into ornate furniture for patrician villas, and into delicate statuettes for temples. A single, flawless tusk from Africa could command a fortune, funding the very administration of the empire that purchased it. Myrrh, too, held immense value, used in sacred rites, in elaborate funerary practices, and as a base for the most expensive perfumes and medicines. This flourishing exchange challenges a persistent historical oversight. For centuries, narratives placed Africa on the periphery of ancient economics, often framed only as a recipient of goods or ideas. The Myrrh and Ivory trails tell a radically different story. They reveal powerful, sophisticated African civilizations that were not passive, but were active, indispensable architects of global luxury markets. Kush and Aksum were not isolated kingdoms waiting for discovery. They were commercial superpowers who understood their leverage, controlling the supply of goods that defined elite status across half the world. Their wealth, evidenced by monumental stelae and sophisticated urban centers, was grown from this deep-rooted connection to a terrestrial network that linked the African interior to the rhythms of the entire Indian Ocean and Mediterranean world. This reminds us that the ancient global economy had many hearts, and one of the most influential beat steadily on the plateau of Ethiopia, its pulse measured in the weight of ivory and the scent of sacred resin. The high Himalayas were not a wall but a woven fabric of mutual need. At altitudes where the air grows thin and the soil yields little, survival itself became a product of trade. For centuries, a profound and practical exchange pulsed along the roof of the world, connecting the high Tibetan plateau with the fertile valleys of Nepal and northern India. This was the Himalayan salt and grain exchange, a network built not on the desire for luxury, but on the stark arithmetic of sustenance. On the Tibetan side, the critical resource was salt, harvested from the vast, mineral-rich lakes of the Changtang Plateau. Alongside it came borax, a mineral essential for metalworking and preserving food. These were commodities the highlands had in abundance, but what they lacked was grain. The valleys to the south, however, flourished with barley, rice, and millet, alongside crafted metal goods like cooking pots and tools. This created a perfect, life-sustaining equation. Each autumn, as the harvest concluded in the south, massive caravans would form. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of shaggy yaks were loaded with heavy slabs of pink and white salt. Porters, men and women renowned for their stamina, shouldered equally staggering loads. Together, they embarked on journeys that are almost incomprehensible in their difficulty. They navigated narrow trails carved into cliff faces, crossed swaying rope bridges over thunderous gorges, and ascended passes so high they were choked with snow for much of the year. The timing was everything, a precise dance with the seasons to avoid the deepest winter snows and the summer monsoon landslides. This was commerce at its most elemental, a direct barter of weight and value, where a slab of salt might be traded for an equal measure of grain. But this constant, grueling movement did far more than fill stomachs. It wove a dense tapestry of cultural connection between Tibetan Buddhist communities and the Hindu kingdoms to the south. At seasonal trading towns and monastic way stations, merchants lived alongside one another for weeks, sharing meals, stories, and rituals. Religious ideas flowed as naturally as the goods. Tibetan Buddhist monks traveling with caravans introduced their philosophies and iconography, while Hindu and Buddhist artistic motifs from Nepal traveled north, influencing the stunning murals and statues in Himalayan monasteries. The trade routes became pilgrimage routes, and the marketplaces became forums for cultural dialogue. The physical artifacts of this exchange are still visible today in the hybrid architectural styles of mountain temples, where pagoda roofs meet Tibetan prayer wheels. This network demonstrates a fundamental truth about human geography. What appears on a map as an impenetrable barrier, a jagged line of the world's highest peaks, was in reality a connective tissue. It was shaped not by empires seeking glory, but by communities solving a simple, shared problem: how to live in a demanding world. The bonds forged by salt and grain created a resilient regional identity, proving that sometimes the most enduring connections are spun from the threads of sheer necessity, a quiet testament to how trade can build not just economies but understanding. A narrow gorge cuts through rock so high it blots out the sun. This was the Darial Pass, the most famous of the Caucasian mountain corridors, and for millennia it functioned as a literal turnstile between worlds. The towering Caucasus Range, wedged between the Black Sea and the Caspian, presented a formidable wall, but human ingenuity and need always find the cracks. These high passes became one of antiquity's most strategic and perilous bridges, a funnel through which the currents of north and south were forced to meet. From the open steppes to the north came the nomadic confederations, their wealth carried on the hoof, superb horses bred for stamina and war, along with furs and amber. Pressing up from the fertile south came the emissaries of settled empires, the Eurasians, the Persians, the later Romans and Byzantines, bringing woven textiles, crafted metalwork, and the fruits of agricultural surplus. The trade was raw and direct: metals for horses, cloth for furs, and tragically, in a painful chapter of this exchange, the movement of individuals captured in conflict and sold into servitude. This constant, pressurized exchange made the region not a backwater but a prize. Control of a single pass like the Darial meant controlling the tap on a vital economic artery. Kingdoms rose and fell with this geography. The Eurasians built formidable fortresses to command the trade. The legendary wealth of Colchis, destination of Jason's Argonauts in myth, was rooted in its control of the western routes to the Black Sea. Armenia's periodic moments of power often coincided with its ability to police and profit from these mountain corridors. This was not a place where you built a tranquil, isolated civilization. It was a place where you built a fortress and a toll booth because the flow of wealth was constant and irresistible. That relentless flow of people, goods, and ideas over centuries did something extraordinary. It created a human tapestry of stunning complexity. The Caucasus region today is home to a mosaic of ethnic groups and a bewildering array of languages from completely distinct linguistic families, existing in a relatively small area. This is not an accident of history, it is the direct, living legacy of its ancient role. Each wave of traders, migrants, soldiers, and settlers moving through those passes left behind fragments of their culture, their speech, and their lineage which took root in the mountain valleys. The region became a permanent intercultural mixing zone, a reservoir of diversity preserved by the very mountains that made travel so difficult. So when we look at a map of ancient trade, we must see the Caucasus not as a barrier colored in brown, but as a vibrant, humming interchange where the languages spoken today are themselves artifacts, living echoes of the countless deals struck in the shadow of those eternal peaks. True resilience is not born from abundance but from the careful sharing of scarcity. Long before the grand caravans laden with gold ever crossed the great desert, the Sahara was already a living, connected space. It was not an empty void, but a constellation of life, each oasis a solitary star linked to others by faint, enduring trails. This was the foundational web, the Saharan Oasis networks, a civilization built on the simple, vital exchange of what you have for what you need to see another season. The scale was local, the stakes were absolute. From one palm-shaded spring to the next, communities traded what their particular patch of earth could provide. Dates rich in sugar and energy from one grove were bartered for hardy grains like millet from another. Pottery, woven mats, and news traveled with the merchants who knew the precise location of each hidden well, the exact shape of the dunes that signaled safe passage. This was an economy of survival, but also of profound social ingenuity. These routes created a distributed support system. If drought struck one oasis, its neighbors could provide sustenance. If conflict made one trail unsafe, knowledge of an alternative path meant the difference between life and a slow end in the dunes. This constant, low-level exchange did something remarkable. It built a shared mental map of the desert, a body of knowledge passed down through generations. The true architects of this system were peoples like the Garamontes, who flourished in what is now the Libyan desert. They were not merely survivors, they were hydrological engineers. Using a system of underground tunnels called fagaras, they tapped into ancient fossil aquifers, pulling water to the surface to create lush, artificial oases where the map showed only rock and sand. Their settlements became bustling hubs in this local web, places where not only goods were traded, but where technologies like well digging and irrigation techniques were shared, and where cultural practices blended. This local network was the essential prerequisite for everything that followed. Think of it as the capillary system that nourished the possibility of a larger artery. The merchants who later guided the massive gold caravans did not invent their routes from nothing. They inherited them. They relied on the oasis communities as way stations, on the local guides whose ancestors had walked these paths for centuries, and on the established protocols of trust and exchange that made crossing such a hostile landscape a calculated risk rather than a suicide mission. The gold trade could not have existed without the date trade. The monumental wealth that flowed between continents was built upon a humble, resilient network of communities who had mastered the art of connection in a world designed to separate. Their legacy is a lesson in seeing the map differently, in understanding that the most dramatic lines of global commerce are always traced over the faint, enduring paths of local necessity. The true measure of an empire is not in its crown jewels but in its granaries. While the glittering trade in silvers and gems captured the scribe's attention, a far more fundamental exchange rumbled across the plains of the Near East. This was the movement of grain, the Mesopotamian grain roads, a network of necessity that turned sustenance into a strategic commodity. The Fertile Crescent was a land of paradox, capable of astonishing agricultural yields, yet terrifyingly vulnerable. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were unpredictable life-givers, their floods sometimes too weak or too violent. A single drought year could empty storerooms, and the dense urban populations of cities like or Babylon had outgrown the ability to be self-sufficient in every season. When local harvests failed, or when the population swelled beyond what the land could immediately support, the city's survival depended on looking outward. This is where the grain roads emerged, linking the Mesopotamian heartland to the breadbaskets of Anatolia, the Levant, and even the Nile Valley. Transporting bulk grain overland was a monumental challenge. Unlike a chest of spices, a shipment of barley or wheat was heavy, bulky, and perishable. It required entire caravans of donkeys, a small army of handlers, and meticulously planned journeys between secure storehouses. The cost of moving a ton of grain 100 miles by donkey could easily exceed the value of the grain itself. Yet, the alternative urban famine and the collapse of social order was unthinkable. This logistical nightmare forced the world's first bureaucracies to innovate. To manage this flow of sustenance, administrators developed systems that look remarkably modern. They implemented early forms of price controls to prevent speculation during shortages. They built vast, state-controlled granaries, the strategic reserves of the ancient world, to buffer against lean years. They organized rationing systems, distributing grain to temple workers, soldiers, and civil servants, effectively creating some of the first social safety nets funded by long-distance trade. The meticulous cuneiform records from this era are filled not just with epic poetry, but with ledgers detailing grain receipts, shipment sizes, and storage capacities. This trade in staples did more than fill bellies. It reshaped the very concept of imperial power. A king's legitimacy rested on his ability to ensure the people were fed. Securing access to foreign grain sources became a cornerstone of foreign policy, leading to treaties, alliances, and sometimes military expeditions to keep these vital corridors open. The grain roads remind us of a profound and humbling truth: the dazzling global connections of antiquity, the exchange of ideas and luxuries we so often celebrate, were built upon a much quieter, more urgent foundation. Before a philosopher could ponder the stars or an artisan could carve lapis lazuli, the city needed to eat. Ancient globalization was not merely a story of desire for the rare and beautiful, but a relentless, ingenious pursuit of security, a trade in the very stuff of life that silently underpinned every ziggurat, every law code, and every moment of civilization's fragile, flourishing light. A straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, and the Persian Empire was built on this principle of elegant control. While the Royal Road is famous for its swift messengers, its true revolution was economic, a state-engineered superhighway that turned an empire of diverse cultures into a single, humming marketplace. Commissioned by King Darius I in the 5th century before the Common Era, this was infrastructure as an act of will, stretching over 1,500 miles from the administrative capital of Susa in Persia to the wealthy frontier city of Sardis in Lydia. It was a tangible declaration that the empire's greatest strength was connection. This was no meandering caravan trail. Surveyors plotted its course for efficiency, bridging rivers and cutting through mountains to create the most direct possible route. At regular intervals precisely calculated for a day's travel stood fortified way stations. These were not simple rest stops, but full-service hubs offering fresh horses for the royal couriers, secure lodging for merchants, and storage for goods in transit. Guards patrolled the most vulnerable sections, making this the safest trade corridor the ancient world had ever seen. The economic impact was transformative. Before the Royal Road, moving goods across such distances was a gamble of epic proportions, a slow, dangerous, and expensive series of negotiations with local chieftains and bandits. Darius's highway changed the fundamental math of commerce. By dramatically lowering the risk and the cost of transport, it unlocked the productive potential of every province. Phoenician purple dye from the Levant could now reliably reach the workshops of Babylon. Textiles from Egypt could flow to the markets of Anatolia. Silver from Anatolian mines could travel securely to the imperial treasury. The road did not just move luxury items, it integrated regional economies into a cohesive whole, allowing grain from a fertile region to relieve a shortage in another, stabilizing prices and preventing local famines from sparking rebellion. Think of it as the ancient world's first high-speed rail network, but for caravans of donkeys and carts. Its speed was legendary, with royal messengers using relay riders to cover the entire distance in just 7 days, a journey that would take a normal caravan 3 months. This speed meant information on market prices, harvest reports, and political developments moved almost as fast as the goods themselves, allowing for a level of economic coordination previously unimaginable. The Persian state understood that this physical network was the skeleton of its power, and they invested in it accordingly. It was a template written in stone and dirt, a blueprint for imperial unity that every subsequent empire, from Rome to the Mongols, would strive to replicate. The Royal Road's legacy is a lesson in visionary logistics, proving that the most powerful thing a ruler can build is not a wall, but a road, a conduit for prosperity that binds distant lands together with the steady rhythm of commerce. An empire's luxury was built on northern sunlight and eastern sand. While the legions marched on famous paved highways, two quieter, specialized networks hummed with a different purpose, feeding Rome's insatiable appetite for beauty and utility. These were the amber and glass roads, less military supply lines and more the arteries of a sophisticated, demand-driven economy. the amber route was an ancient path supercharged by Roman wealth. Baltic amber, that golden fossilized resin, had been trickling south for millennia, but under the Pax Romana, the flow became a flood. Secure borders and a unified currency meant a merchant in Carnuntum, on the Danube frontier, could reliably acquire raw amber from Germanic traders, then send it south with confidence. It traveled the well-maintained Roman road network, not as a rare trinket for the elite, but as a material for a booming mass market. In workshops across the empire, especially in Aquileia at the head of the Adriatic Sea, artisans carved the amber into an astonishing array of objects, rings, amulets, decorative inlays for furniture, and even small, intricate gaming pieces. This was not just about adornment. Amber was also believed to have protective and medicinal properties, making it popular across social classes. The scale of this industry was staggering. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder complained about the vast sums of money flowing north to pay for what he saw as a frivolous luxury, a clear sign of its immense economic pull. This route demonstrates how Rome did not just conquer territory, it systematically connected and commercialized pre-existing networks, turning a sporadic trade into a standardized industry. Meanwhile, a more fragile treasure was being manufactured from raw ingredients hauled across the Mediterranean. The Roman glass road was an early industrial supply chain in action. Primary ingredients were simple sand from the Levant, renowned for its purity and clarity, and natron, a naturally occurring soda ash harvested from the dry lake beds of Egypt. These bulky, raw materials were shipped in vast quantities to centralized production hubs, most notably in the Bay of Naples in Italy and later in Gaul. There, in large-scale workshops, they were melted together in furnaces and transformed. The real revolution was the invention of glassblowing around the 1st century before the Common Era, a technological leap that allowed for faster, cheaper production. Suddenly, glass was no longer an exotic luxury. The Roman world became saturated with it. It took the form of elegant blown bottles and flasks for storing wine, oil, and perfumes, durable window panes for the villas of the wealthy, and countless tiny, colorful tesserae cubes used to create the magnificent mosaics that decorated floors and walls from Britain to Syria. This was mass consumption on an imperial scale, a standardized product made from distant raw materials and distributed to every corner of the known world. The true significance of these twin routes lies in what they represent, a shift from trade solely in finished luxuries to trade in the raw materials of industry. Rome was not just importing beautiful amber pendants or delicate glass vessels from mysterious Eastern craftsmen. It was importing the very ingredients of its own cultural and material world, organizing their transport over vast distances, and manufacturing a consistent Roman product for a Roman market. This level of economic specialization and logistical coordination, where sand from Syria and soda from Egypt met in a workshop in France to make a bottle used in Britain, reveals an ancient globalism far more complex and familiar than we often assume. It was a world where supply chains already stretched across continents, all to satisfy the everyday desires of an empire. High in the mountains, a cup of steaming tea held the balance of empires. While the Silk Road captured headlines, a quieter, more vertical network was forging bonds of absolute necessity across the roof of the world. The Chinese tea horse road, known as the Chamagudao, was a medieval marvel with ancient roots, a ribbon of commerce stitched across some of the most treacherous landscapes on the planet. Its origins reach back to the Tang dynasty around the 7th or 8th century, born from a simple, powerful equation. The high-altitude Tibetan plateau, with its pastoral diet rich in dairy and meat, craved the digestive aid and stimulating warmth of tea. Meanwhile, the Chinese imperial armies, constantly defending their vast frontiers, were desperate for the sturdy, agile warhorses bred on those same Tibetan highlands. This was not trade for luxury, it was trade for survival. the logistics defied belief. The route snaked out from the tea-growing mountains of Sichuan and Yunnan, climbing westward into the cloud-piercing peaks of the Hengduan Mountains. Here, the earth itself seemed to rebel against passage. Caravans, often led by hardy Naxi and Tibetan traders, navigated narrow trails etched into cliff faces, crossed roaring rivers on swaying rope bridges made of vines and bamboo, and ascended passes so high the air grew thin. Primary beast of burden was not the camel, but the sure-footed mule and the yak, animals uniquely adapted to this vertical world. A single journey could take months, with porters carrying staggering loads of compressed tea bricks, each one a compact unit of currency, food, and medicine rolled into a single fragrant package. This arduous exchange did far more than move commodities. It wove a tapestry of profound cultural interdependence. At trading towns like Lijiang and Doli, which flourished as hubs, Tibetan horsemen and Chinese tea merchants lived side by side for seasons, bartering, sharing stories, and blending customs. The most significant flow alongside the tea bricks was spiritual. The route became a major conduit for Tibetan Buddhism into China. Monks traveled with the caravans, carrying scriptures and religious art. In return, Chinese silversmithing and architectural techniques filtered back into Tibet. The trade created a mutual reliance so deep that for centuries, the political stability of the region hinged on the smooth operation of this network. To disrupt the tea supply was to risk unrest in Tibet, and to cut off the horse trade was to weaken China's military. It was an elegant, if fragile, balance of power brokered not by diplomats in palaces, but by merchants on mountain paths. The legacy of the tea horse road is etched into the landscape and the culture. The remote towns that once thrived as way stations still bear the architectural imprint of this hybrid exchange. More importantly, it demonstrates a timeless principle of human geography. When necessity is great enough, we will find a way across any barrier, turning the world's most formidable mountains into a bridge of mutual need. This vertical highway reminds us that some of the most enduring connections are forged not from the desire for gold, but from the simple, shared requirements of the body and the state, a partnership sealed with a cup of tea and the trusty hoof of a mountain horse. A continent away from the spice routes and silk caravans, another river of commerce was flowing. Long before European ships ever crossed the Atlantic, the great Mississippi and its web of tributaries formed the backbone of a sophisticated exchange system, a continental marketplace that moved the very materials of life and belief. From roughly the year 800 of the Common Era, this aquatic network connected cultures across the eastern half of North America in a vibrant, continuous dialogue. The geography dictated the method. While we think of rivers as barriers, for these societies they were highways. Canoes, carved from massive tree trunks, became the freighters of this inland world, capable of carrying tons of cargo. When the waterways did not connect, people simply carried the boats and goods overland, a practice called portage, creating a seamless chain of lakes, rivers, and short trails that spanned from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. What moved along these liquid paths was a catalogue of continental treasures. Shimmering copper from the mines near Lake Superior traveled south, transformed into ceremonial regalia and symbolic ornaments. Glossy seashells from the warm Gulf Coast, like the distinctive lightning whelk, journeyed north to be crafted into sacred cups and gorgets, their spiral forms echoing cosmic symbols. Sheets of reflective mica were quarried from the Appalachian Mountains and sent westward to be cut into intricate, delicate shapes that caught the firelight in ceremonial spaces. Even practical goods like chert, a high-quality stone for making sharp tools and points, was traded across hundreds of miles from specific, prized quarries. All these currents of material wealth converged at monumental centers, the greatest of which was Cahokia. Located near modern-day St. Louis, Cahokia was not a city in a traditional sense, but a carefully planned ceremonial metropolis, its skyline dominated by enormous earthen mounds. At its height around the year 1100, it was the largest settlement north of Mexico, a clearinghouse for the continent's spiritual and material economy. A shell from the Gulf, a copper bead from the north, and a mica effigy from the east could all end up in the same burial or offering at the base of Monk's Mound, testifying to Cahokia's reach. This exchange did far more than move objects. It transmitted the blueprint for a civilization. Along with the copper and shells came a cultural package that scholars call the Mississippian complex. The knowledge of maize agriculture, a transformative technology that allowed for dense populations, spread up the river valleys. New religious ideas about the cosmos, often centered on a triad of symbols, the sun, a cross, and a serpent, traveled with the traders. Even styles of pottery and town planning, with their central plazas and platform mounds, flowed along these routes. This network proves a profound point about human ingenuity. Without any contact with Eurasia or its models of camel caravans and royal roads, the societies of ancient North America independently arrived at the same solution. They saw the logic of their landscape and built a complex, long-distance trade system to satisfy spiritual, social, and practical needs, binding a continent together with the steady paddle stroke of a canoe. The silent mounds that remain are not just piles of earth, they are the enduring testament to a forgotten American globalization, a web of connection that hummed for centuries along the continent's great flowing heart. From the amber shores of the Baltic to the earthen mounds of the Mississippi, a single truth emerges from the dust of these forgotten paths. This was not a world of isolated wonders, but a planet already humming with connection. These 25 routes were not the exceptions. They were the standard fabric of ancient globalization, the hidden architecture upon which our modern world was quietly assembled. They reveal a system far more complex than the simple exchange of silk for gold. This was a multi-layered economy of profound interdependence. At its peak flowed the luxuries, the frankincense and jade that defined divine and royal power. Just beneath that moved the vital staples, the grain and salt that determined whether a city would feast or face hardship. Deeper still ran the currents of raw industrial materials, the tin for bronze, the sand for glass, the copper for tools that supplied the workshops of entire civilizations. And interwoven with it all was the most precious cargo of all, the intangible exchange of ideas, beliefs, technologies, and artistic styles that traveled in the minds and practices of the merchants themselves. The decline of these terrestrial networks was rarely a dramatic collapse, but more often a slow fading. Geopolitical shifts could make a once secure past too dangerous as empires fractured and local conflicts flared. Subtle changes in climate could desiccate a critical oasis or alter a river's course, rendering a 1,000-year-old trail obsolete. Most decisively, the relentless rise of maritime technology offered a compelling alternative. Why risk a 3-month caravan across a desert when a ship could carry 10 times the cargo in half the time, powered by predictable monsoon winds? The ocean did not erase overland trade, but it reorganized the global map, marginalizing some corridors while giving new life to others. Yet to call these routes forgotten is perhaps a misnomer, for their legacy is written into our very being. It is embedded in the words we speak, where linguistic echoes of ancient trade lingo still resonate. It is woven into the tapestry of our genetic diversity, a quiet record of those long journeys and meetings along the way. It is visible in the material fragments of our shared past, the Afghan lapis in an Egyptian tomb, the Roman glass in a Chinese cache, the Siberian fur trim in a European painting. These artifacts are not isolated treasures, they are the durable nodes of a vast, vanished network. This perspective demands a fundamental shift in how we view history. The grand narrative has long been dominated by the deeds of kings and the outcomes of battles, events recorded by the victors. but the deeper, more enduring story is the one written by footsteps, not decrees. It is the story of the anonymous Sogdian merchant negotiating a deal in a Chang'an market, the Garamonte guide leading a caravan to a hidden well, the Mississippian canoeist portaging his copper load between rivers. Their names are lost, but their collective journeys built the interconnected foundations of everything that followed. They were the original global citizens, moving through a world without borders, driven by need, curiosity, and the universal language of exchange. Their forgotten roads remind us that the true pulse of human history has always beat along the trade routes, in the quiet, relentless commerce that turns isolation into community and weaves the scattered threads of humanity into a single, intricate, and enduring story. So the map we thought we knew is incomplete. It is drawn in bold lines of conquest and empire, but the true lines of force were fainter, etched by countless footsteps. Our journey across these 25 forgotten roads reveals a world already globalized, a living network of exchange that operated for centuries in the shadow of official history. These were not mere footnotes, they were the foundational circuits of the ancient economy, a system of astonishing complexity and resilience. Think of it as a vast, organic machine. The luxury routes carrying silk and incense were its dazzling, visible output, but they were powered by deeper, hidden gears, the relentless movement of grain and salt, the strategic flow of metals and timber, the quiet barter of everyday necessities that kept entire civilizations from grinding to a halt. This machine did not just move goods, it processed culture. A Buddhist sutra could travel the same path as a bolt of cotton. A new design for a water wheel could arrive with a shipment of spices. Religions, languages, artistic styles, and technologies were all passengers on these caravans, remixing and evolving with every handshake at a desert oasis or a mountain pass. The great events recorded in history, the rise and fall of dynasties, the spread of faiths, were often surface ripples on this deeper, constant current of connection. What does this mean for us today? It reframes a fundamental human story. For millennia, we have not been isolated tribes slowly discovering one another. We have been nodes in a persistent network, linked by a primal drive to trade, to share, and to understand. Our default condition has been interconnection. Isolation was the aberration, often a temporary and fragile state. These routes teach us that our strength has always come from exchange, from the cross-pollination of ideas and the mutual dependencies forged across daunting distances. They whisper that borders are recent inventions while pathways are ancient truths. So the next time you look at a map, try to see past the solid colors and sharp lines that divide nations. Look instead for the subtle gradients, the river valleys and mountain passes, the stretches of desert and steppe. Picture the ghostly impressions of those countless journeys, the worn stones of a forgotten caravanserai, the faint trail beside a dried-up well. See the map not as a record of separation, but as a testament to movement. The true architects of our shared world were not the emperors who drew the borders, but the merchants, guides, and porters who walked across them, weaving a single, intricate story from 1,000 scattered threads. If this journey through the hidden arteries of history has reshaped your view of the past, consider joining us for more. Subscribe to continue exploring the profound mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of our world. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these forgotten highways resonated most with you? Share your perspective in the comments below.